you'll be giving the baby this much amino acids. If you increase your fluid rate, you go up to 1.6 gram. If you give a higher amino acid percent, you can get up to 3 grams per kilo per day of amino acids that can be given through a peripheral IV while you're waiting for full TPN to arrive. The problem is you have to keep in mind that if you start this high, you can't increase your fluids because you'll end up maybe giving way too many amino acids. But a lot of people are using this kind of strategy to get a baby through the first hours to days of life. In our nursery, we use these solutions as the very first IV fluid these babies get. So again, it doesn't have all the micronutrients that we might like. There's a lot of criticism. People get uncomfortable changing so many times to different kinds of rates that might actually over or under nourish protein. But it's a one strategy that you can use if you can't get TPN right away. I just want to point out that there's no evidence that gradually increasing amino acid intake improves tolerance of amino acids, unless Dr. Ziegler knows something I do, because I think yesterday he said that he slowly advances his amino acids. And there's no evidence that gradually increasing lipid intake intravenously improves tolerance to lipids. Most lipid tolerance is really dependent on gestationally related development of lipases that will help you digest your amino acids, or your lipid. So, the goals of early parenteral and enteral nutrition, at least in our nursery, are to give amino acids starting the first day of life, to prevent protein breakdown and hopefully start to produce real protein growth, to advance glucose and lipids as rapidly as tolerated, and as you know, that's very different in different babies, and to initiate minimal enteral feedings on day 1 to 2 of life. So we've talked about early aggressive nutrition, but I think that enteral feeding in early aggressive nutrition has not been well studied or well defined. There's supportive data from both animal and human studies that enteral feeding really can make a difference in early growth. And Dr. New talked about some of that yesterday in his discussions. However, as you know as practitioners, in preterm infants, all decisions regarding enteral feeding are based on the fear of developing necrotizing enterocolitis. And as a result, as a group, we are very cautious in feeding strategies. And this is the thing we try to avoid. So I'll mention just a few examples of what we've learned from animal studies and human studies that might give us some ideas on how to do early aggressive enteral feeding and to justify their use. Exclusive parenteral IV nutrition behaves like starvation and results in significant decreases in enteric mucosal mass. However, 6 days, brief periods of IV nutrition, let me back up a minute, so this is starvation from exclusive parenteral nutrition. This is a study that was done by Doug Burren, and he took piglets, and the piglet model is actually most like the human infant, and he gave them 6 days of oral nutrition or intravenous nutrition. And in the IV group, so the one that was getting all parenteral nutrition and that behaves like starvation, the IV group demonstrated a 50% decrease in intestinal weight, DNA content, and activity of digestive enzymes. So that if you're giving parenteral nutrition alone, you're really putting these piglets and presumably infants at risk for breaking down their own gut mucosa. So briefly, minimal enteral feedings, which I'm sure you're all using in one capacity or another, really have no definitions or clear guidelines for their use. So it's not been very helpful, I think, when you look at the literature, to come up with enteral feeding strategies using minimal enteral nutrition. And again, minimal enteral feedings usually refer to small volume breast milk or formula, giving in enterally in amounts ranging from 1 to 25 mLs per kilo per day. I laugh when I talk to my residents who say, we're going to start them on the minimal enteral feeding regimen. And I say, well, what is that? And you get a different answer from everybody because there are no standard guidelines for trophic feedings. They're also called priming feedings because they stimulate many aspects of gut function, trophic feeds because they prevent gut atrophy, and non-nutritive feeds to indicate that they're not a major source of nutrition. And again, I think one of the points we're at now in neonatal nutrition is everybody's starting to give some degree of trophic feedings, but what we don't know is when do we jump from trophic feedings to nutritive feedings. And there's not, I don't think, a lot of good studies to really guide us, and likely because babies are so different. So I just want to point out that there is some evidence that really supports minimal enteral feedings. And Alan Lucas showed that a minimal enteral feeding results in a surge of hormones that mimics the response to feeds in healthy term infants. So we know that at least by giving some enteral feeding, you're stimulating normal gut hormone response and having a beneficial effect. And there's a significant increase in a number of GI hormones in response to minimal enteral feedings that doesn't occur if enteral feedings are withheld. And this is just a partial list of the hormones, the gastric hormones, that can be released by even small amounts of feeding. So if nothing else, we put in very tiny amounts to try to get stimulation of this kind of hormone release. Sorry? Okay. Sorry about that. My finger's heavy this morning. So these hormones that were just listed are thought to have various roles in stimulating gut growth, gut development, increasing the motility of the gut, and influencing both liver and pancreatic metabolism. So the question is, what's the ideal volume of minimal enteral feeds that'll have some beneficial effects in our babies in the first few days of life? And we don't have a lot of literature about that, but in one of Lucas's study, he said that a total enteral intake of 12 mLs per kilo in 6 days, so that's 2 mLs per kilo per day, produced a significant increase in the number of these hormones. So even tiny amounts appear to make a difference. Carolyn Burseth, I thought was going to be here to talk about these issues. She's done a lot of work in manometry in preterm infants, and a lot of her work has really guided what we do. And the manometry studies you put down a probe and actually measure pressures and gut motility. And she's shown that early enteral feeding actually improves maturation of the motor responses of the small intestine. So it's actually a therapeutic trial to get the gut moving. Minimal enteral feeding has a positive influence on both mixing and forward propulsion of feedings. And she's shown that volumes as small as 4 mLs per kilo over 2 hours stimulates gut GI motor function. And clinically, in her studies, minimal enteral feedings resulted in fewer episodes of feeding intolerance and improved weight gain. And one thing to point out was we all get rather impatient in that these babies just continue to have aspirates and aspirates and don't move their food through. But keep in mind that at 24 weeks gestation, the GI tract is anatomically very well developed, and most digestive enzymes are present. The lactase is only 5% of adult levels, and gastric acid secretion is sufficient for intergastric digestion. At 24 weeks, however, the greatest deterrent to successfully feeding babies enterally is limited GI motility. So getting the gut working, getting it moving, getting the motor complexes activated are the things that limit those babies being able to digest. And these infants showed delayed gastric emptying, decreased intestinal transit times, but unfortunately it's difficult to tell benign GI maturity, aspirates and abdominal extension, and true signs of GI tract compromise. So hence we get stuck here worrying about necrotizing enterocolitis. And just in summary, there have been a number of studies that have been done since between 1985 and 1998 that have, as a group, concluded minimal enteral feedings are safe, don't increase the incidence of NEC, and that they have many benefits. Compared to the delaying the start of minimal enteral feeding, these minimal enteral feedings decrease the episode of feeding intolerance. They induce GI trophic effects, enhance hormone and peptide responses, and again help mature the GI tract. I just want to point out that there are a couple of Cochrane reviews that have been done, one in 2000 and one in 2005, looking at the rate of feeding advance. And in both studies, the conclusion was the ideal rate, safe rate of advancement of feedings remains unclear. And early versus delayed feeding, early meaning delaying feedings in the first week versus after the first week, doesn't appear to increase necrotizing colitis. So this really doesn't tell us how much we should be increasing. Unfortunately, these are areas of research that really need to be done. There have been no definitive studies in preterm infants, despite several trials, that have specifically addressed the optimal time to start minimal enteral feedings, the optimal volume, when to advance, and the effect of gestational age on these different feeding practices. So there's really a critical need for studies to see how we should transition from minimal feeds to more rapid advance and how it can be done safely. And in terms of, I think, all the speakers who've really talked about growth and nutrition in this conference have really focused on starting early, and then what more nutrition do we give as we go farther out along these growth curves. And again, there are many unanswered questions along those curves. So a lot more work needs to be done to determine feeding strategies to optimize growth and development of these very preterm infants. And though we have some ideas of how to advance nutrition, there are still, again, many unanswered issues. Thank you. Thank you.